I didn't tell this story a while ago. We were laughing about trying to figure out how to signal for me to be quiet. And I told him nothing works. Steve's tried humming. Others have tried other things through the years, and it means nothing to a preacher. But I read a story this week, and I just thought I'm not going to tell it until everybody can hear it. Story of a group that had a special meal. It was a banquet, and the speaker at the last minute notified those in charge that he could not be there, that he had an emergency that came up, and so he could not be there. And so they looked and they saw one of the local preachers. He had come to the banquet, and so one of the individuals in charge went up and said, "Hey," said, "our speaker can't be here." Said, "Can you speak no more than 10 minutes?" "Yeah, not a problem." "Well, we'd appreciate it. No more than 10 minutes. You got it?" Got it. No more than 10 minutes. So he preached 10 minutes, and he kept going, or speaking kept going after 10 minutes. And he hit 20 minutes, and the guy that was being the MC, the guy just kept talking. He hit 30 minutes, and the guy kind of tapped his gavel a little bit. Guy kept talking. He hit 45 minutes. He hit that gavel a little bit harder. Guy just kept talking. He hit 55 minutes. The guy really hit the gavel. He kept talking. He hit an hour, and the guy took the gavel and he threw it at him. He missed. He hit a guy on the other side of him. He was asleep. He said, without waking up, without opening his eyes, he said, "Hit him again. I still hear him." It has nothing to do with the lesson. I just read it this week. I thought it was hilarious. If you ever walk into this building and you hear me laughing, I'm sorry. I get amused at things. And so I just thought that was funny. I thought I wanted to share it with you. When I read it, I thought, we need to share that sometime. All right. If you have your Bibles with you, turn to Luke chapter 16. Ladies class Wednesday night, they are studying the parables of Jesus. And a few weeks ago, and it's been a few weeks because of things that's been going on Sunday nights, they came to me after class and they said, "We don't understand Luke 16. And I looked at it and I said, "I don't either." No, I said, "Well, let me look at it. It's been a while since I've really thought about Luke 16, and so give me a little bit of time." And then, like I say, we had singing night and different things, and so we've delayed talking about it. But hopefully that's what I want us to do tonight. And so we're gonna treat it a little bit more like a class than a sermon. And so hopefully you'll get the point and you'll see what we're trying to say as we roll on. Let me tell you a story. Stories is really, it's a true story, but a story nevertheless. It's a story of little boys that in a neighborhood. And this was back many years ago. And so, this is when neighborhoods were neighborhoods. Now you drive through a neighborhood, you never see a kid. I don't care if there's 50 of them in the neighborhood. You never see them. You know why? They're in their house playing their video games. But this was in a day and age in which kids got outside. This is, I watched a comedian this morning, and he said every time a kid comes over to my house now, he said, "You know what he's interested in? My password. My password." He said, "I finally told him my password." He said, "If they come in and they say, 'What's your password?' We don't know your password." He says, "My password is get out in the yard and play. That's my password." Well, anyway, these kids, they did that. They played out in the yard. They played the ball out in the cow pasture. They threw the frisbees. They played basketball when it was cool and when it got to fall. And they played football, and at night they played all kinds of kick the can and all these little things, played hide and seek with walkie-talkies and all of these things. So, well, anyway, one summer, they were, like I say, about 10, 11, 12 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. They decided they wanted to have a club. They wanted to be a club. And there's about, like I say, at the most, there's probably 8 to 10 of those boys. And most of the time, there's 6, 7, 8 running around together all the time. So they said, "Okay, we're going to have a club." Okay. Well, what's this club going to be? Well, it wasn't Little Rascals He-Men Haters, or He-Men Women Haters Club. There you go, something like that. It wasn't like that. But we're going to have rules and regulations, and we're going to have dues. What are we going to do with it? Well, we don't know. but everybody, you got to pay a dime, and you pay a dime once a month, and everybody pays, and so then they appointed somebody to be treasurer. And the reason they appointed that individual to be treasurer was they said that they could trust him, and they knew that their money was safe with him, and it wasn't with all the rest. And so they paid their fees, they paid their dues, and they did this for a little bit of time. And so sure enough, this boy, they grew up, you know, they didn't do that club but 2-3 weeks. But anyway, they grew up, they grew apart. But the boy was at his mother's house one day, and she pulled out this little container of money. There's about $1.70 in it, and she said, "You know where this came from?" He looked at it, and he immediately knew what it was. He said, "Yeah." "What is it?" "Oh, well, one summer we boys here in the neighborhood, we was gonna have a club, and they said that I was the only one they could trust, and so this is their dues." "Well, what are you gonna do with it?" "I have no clue." They've, one or two of them's in jail, and well, what are you gonna do? And I don't know. And I really don't know what I did with that $1.70, but I did something with it. And I think maybe Suzanne and I split a Coke with it or something. But it was 30 years later. I still had that money. Yeah, they could trust me with it. Well, therein lies a principle. It's the idea of trust and trusting people. And in the story of what is called by, some call it the unjust steward, some call it the shrewd manager. I call it the shrewd manager because of what is said. But it is about a man that has been placed in charge of something, and in being placed in charge of something, he is able to shrewdly, if you will, get folks to like him. And we'll see, because when you look at this and you first glance at it and you just kind of read through it, you say, this just doesn't match up with what I think the Bible teaches. But let's look at it and let's find out what we can know. Well, first of all, as I studied parables in the auditorium class, we talked about, you got to figure out what's the setting, what's the purpose for the parable. Why is the parable being taught, and to whom is it being taught? Well, in Luke 15 is really where all of this starts. In Luke 15, the tax collectors and the sinners draw near to Jesus. And verse 2 says, the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. And so verse 3 says Jesus had a parable ready for them. And that parable, really, there were three in Luke 15, the parable of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and lost son. When you look at those are three parables, really, parables of grace. It is in the 16th chapter, though, that Jesus is still talking. He turns a little bit to who he's talking to, but he's still basically talking to the same group. It's the same folks. It's the same folks that objected to Jesus eating and receiving sinners. You see, they thought if Jesus was going to be the king, if Jesus was going to be the savior that he claimed to be, that he had to be sitting with the highfalutin folks. And they didn't get this idea of why was he able to receive sinners, and why was he able to receive the tax collectors and the people we don't like. Well, after Jesus delivers the parables of grace, look what he says in verse 1 of the 16th chapter. He also said to his disciples. So he now turns and he talks to those that word disciple just simply means learner. But notice that it says his disciples, his followers. And so while he's still talking to basically the same group of people that he was talking to in Luke 15, he turns more now to his folks, the folks that would listen to him. And it's kind of interesting because if you keep reading in Luke 16, you're going to find the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and you're going to find the idea of being careful with what you've been given. Let's look at the parable. Let's see what the text says. Let's kind of march through it and just talk about it for a minute. Notice what is said. There was a certain man, a rich man, who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. A steward. The word steward simply means a house manager. It's someone that's placed in charge. We, in our terminology, we think of it more like a chief butler, somebody that has been given charge over everybody, over all of the staff, over everyone that is in the household that's working. And so here we have a man that is, as he is called, a steward. But this rich man has somehow gotten a report from someone that the steward, as he calls it, is wasting the rich man's money. Exactly what he's doing, we don't know. Remember now, this is a story that Jesus is telling, and so there are certain, if you will, parameters to it, but yet at the same time, too, there's a certain laxness about trying to fit everything into, let's answer all the questions. Jesus says this man receives word that his steward is cheating. Verse 2, so he called him, said to him, what is this I hear about you? Well, that makes sense. He calls the steward together. He wants to know, I've got a report. I've heard something about you. I want to know about it. And so he says, notice what he says in the last part of verse 2, and give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. There's a day of reckoning coming. We're going to take inventory, and we're going to open up the books. We're going to check, and we're going to see where everything's been going, how everything's been going. What's coming in is going out. You see, I have a report that not everything is coming to me like it should, and so consequently, we're going to have a day of reckoning, because I'm convinced that you no longer should be the steward of the household. So, the steward, verse 3, says within himself, you ever talk to yourself? Quite often. What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. Okay, so he thinks within himself. Now, there are other folks in the Bible that thought within themselves. Matter of fact, story of the prodigal son, that he said to himself. Well, this steward says to himself, what am I going to do? What can I do? How can I get out of this? Because I'm no longer going to be a steward. My master is taking my stewardship away from me. So in other words, he says, I'm without a job. I'm unemployed. What am I going to do? I can't dig. And notice what he says. I think this is interesting. I cannot dig. Now, maybe that was a reality, a truth. In other words, I'm physically unable to dig. Maybe he had some sort of malady. Who knows? That this is a story, remember, that Jesus is telling. But the steward says, I can't dig. But not only am I physically unable to dig, but I can't beg. He's too proud. He's too proud. You see, even though he was a steward, and thus technically he was, if you will, a working man, he still had the pride of having people under him and being over things. And now to beg, because there was no unemployment, there were, I should say, no social programs. What can I do? And so, after he has talked to himself, after he about the fact can't dig, and I'm ashamed to beg, he says in verse 4, I have resolved what to do. So in other words, he says, I've got it. The light bulb goes off above the head. I know what to do. Well, what are you going to do? And when I'm put out of stewardship, I know what to do, that they may receive into their houses. In other words, I'm going to know, and I've got a plan figured out, how folks are going to take me in after I am put out. Now think about this. A steward is a man that has been working for an individual. Guess where he's lived? In the house of the man that owns everything, the rich man's house. So when he loses his job, what else does he lose? Place to live. He's got to have a place to go. And so he's thinking within himself, okay, what can I do? I can't dig, I can't beg. So what can I do so that I'll have somewhere to go? So that's his reasoning. That's if you will, that's how he's thinking this through. And verse 5 says, so he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? So he calls all the folks that owe his master, all the folks that are indebted. Now he's going to give two examples. And I'm, of course, like I say, this is a story that Jesus is trying to make, but the story probably or seems to imply that there were more than two debtors, but two examples are given. And so he calls these debtors together. He says, okay, I want everybody that owes my master some money. I want them to come up. And so the question was a reasonable question. How much do you owe the master? Well, the first one, verse 6, he said 100 measures of oil. Now, best we can tell, 100 measures of oil would probably be what we would liken unto 800 gallons of oil. 800 gallons of oil, it's thought, would have brought in that day and age 1,000 denarii. Well, remember, a denarii is 1 day's wage. And so here's a man that says, well, basically, I owe 800 gallons. And so he said, verse 6, when he said 100 measures, what did the steward say? He said to him, take your bill, sit down, and quickly write 50. So he cuts it in half. You owe 400 gallons. No more 800 gallons. You owe 400 gallons. So he cuts it by 50%. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. Well, how many is 100 measures of wheat? Well, best we can tell, once again, about 1,000 bushels. And this would be somewhere in the neighborhood, we think, of about 2,500 denarii. Now, we don't know why, but he doesn't cut his bill as much as he cuts the first one. No really logic to it from the standpoint of why would he cut one more than the other or one less than the other? We don't know. And the story, that's not the point of the story that Jesus is trying to make. So that may be a logical question, but that's not the emphasis Jesus is trying to teach. So go back to the text. So the man told him, well, take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward. Now stop and think for a minute. We look at this, just stop right there. If you read this parable and you stop right there, you're thinking, Jesus is telling a story about a man who basically master pulled up a little bit on his master, probably had been taken from him all along and stuffing his pockets anyway, and now he's figured out another way to cheat his master. And not only that, but he hasn't, as the old saying goes, he hasn't walked out in style. He's walked out to get revenge. And so it just doesn't seem just. Well, Jesus is not finished. Keep reading. He commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. There's the key. There's the key to understanding this parable. He had dealt shrewdly. He commended him not for his dishonesty. He didn't commend him for the fact that he had cheated him. He didn't commend him for the fact that he had cut all of the bills. He commended him because he was acting shrewdly. Well, if that's the key, preacher, I got to understand what in the world shrewdly means. We would say he acted prudently. The word itself has the idea of he acted towards the future. In other words, he was making future preparation. Now all of a sudden does the light bulb go off and you see the reason for the story? Jesus is trying to tell these people, you need to prepare. There's something that's coming. There's a D-Day coming, a judgment day coming. You need to get ready. That's the point of the lesson. Now, there's other things that we're going to see in just a minute that we can pull out of this, but keep reading. For the son of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. This is the part of the verse that probably throws us all off, and it should, because it's you look at it and you say, is the Lord saying that people of the world are a little bit more shrewd, or a little bit they're a little bit smarter than people that follow him? Or could he be saying that the people of the world in matters of the world are a little bit, if you will, a little bit better at planning, taking the time to figure out the things of the world than the people that follow me? Because the ones that follow me, their focus is what? Heaven. And so they're more concerned with the things of heaven than the things of the world. Doesn't mean that they're not good business people. And it doesn't teach, and he's not teaching, hey, you got to be dishonest to be a good business person, and nor is he teaching that if you want to be a good honest or good business person, you can't follow him. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying here is that you need to think and plan in advance. You see, money creates problems, doesn't it? And we use money in a lot of different ways. We use it, of course, to buy goods. Use it, first of all, as a prestige status. Some folks use it to bully others. In other words, okay, I'm going to get my way, and if I throw enough money in, I'm going to get my way. Be done. Some folks use their money in order to gain friends. What does that sound like? Prodigal son, right? That's what he did. Jesus is simply teaching, here's the lesson. Prepare. Don't be tied up with the world's goods. Make preparation for the future coming judgment. Well, preacher, really, is there some lessons we can learn? Because that's some of the things that we need to know. We need to always understand that when we look at a parable, we look at it for what Jesus is trying to teach. But sometimes there are some lessons within the parable. Now, the book that the ladies are studying on Wednesday, I have not read all of it. I've read bits and pieces of it. Mike's a great guy, and I get his point. What Mike really says is, if you haven't read his book, those of you that are not in the class or you just haven't looked at your wife's book, Mike basically says there's one purpose, one lesson, and only one lesson per parable. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do agree with Mike in the fact that sometimes we try to list about 50 different lessons in a parable, and they're not all teaching those things. And so we do have to be careful. And Mike's a great guy, by the way. I know his brother far better than I know him, but he's a really good guy and a great Bible steward and great Bible teacher and presenter of the truth. But there are some lessons to be learned in this parable. Well, what are they? Well, first of all, don't fall in love with money. Having food and raiment, let's be there with content. Look in Timothy chapter 6. I want to show you something. I want to show you what Paul says there in 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing to this world, it's certain we can carry nothing out. Having food and clothing, what does he say? He says, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snare, into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which some, having strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Paul teaches a lot in that verse. One of the lessons that Paul teaches us is don't fall in love with money. We love this world. And it is true that money buys us certain things. Money buys us certain privileges. And in and of itself, now you can read books, you can read religious books, and I thought it was interesting. I read several this week in preparation for this, and one made the statement. He said, "Money is evil." It's not right. In and of itself, money is not evil. It's how it's used. We use it to buy goods. We used it to buy our clothes that you have. You used it to buy food for today. You used it to pay for your electric bill, to pay for your water bill, to pay for your bills, pay for your doctor bills, your medicine, so forth and so on. What's wrong with that? Nothing. But when we begin to use it for evil means and evil practices, it becomes evil. And notice, if you will, that what Paul says here is that this money can bring certain corruption. And he talks about it here, excuse me, in 1 Timothy chapter 6. But notice that it's more than just money, it's the love of money. Now, that's interesting because you know what he's saying? He's basically saying you don't have to have money to have a problem. It's the love of money. It's the root of all kinds of evil. Job said it in Job chapter 1 and verse 21. Solomon said almost the same thing in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 15. This world will take nothing. Remember, Job says, naked came I into the world, naked shall I return. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You can't take it with you. I think I shared with you this story to kind of change the mood and the tenor for just a second. I shared with you the story of the man that had gained a lot of money. And in gaining a lot of money, he had it put into garbage bags and he had it put into the attic. And he told his wife that when he died, as his spirit floated into heaven, he was going to grab his money and take it with him. And so one day, sure enough, in the house, he died. Folks got word. Some came to see, some came to check. And all of a sudden, she runs up into the attic. They wonder what in the world, has she lost her mind? And she comes down from the attic and she says, I knew it. I knew he should have put that money in the basement. Not a true story. Just one of those, as Jay calls it, preacher stories. But it's the love of money. We need money. And we plan for our futures with regards to our money, don't we? I do. I am. One day I'm going to retire. One day. I don't know when that is. I hope personally it's a long way off. Long way off. But one day I'm going to retire. I'm going to need some money. As you all can testify, Social Security ain't much. But it's not much. And so Suzanne and I, we've made some arrangements through the years, and I've always put into an IRA and tried to save some along the way in other things, and in order to be able to one day retire. And if I ever retire, I'll be fine with it. But the love of money can get us into trouble. Notice what Paul says. The love of money is, and I'm glad the New King James translated this way, a root. It's not the root, as in the, but root. A root of all kinds of evil, which after some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. You see, it's that love of that ultimately causes us to seek those things that aren't right. And so Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 8, to be carnally minded is death. Now, carnally minded, I know you know what it means, but just so we're all on the same plane. To be carnally minded is to be minded of the flesh. In other words, things of the flesh can serve you more than things of the spirit. And so Paul says to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And so from this one parable of this shrewd manager, he really teaches us don't fall in love with money. It's not about money. But then second lesson that we learn is to make preparations for the future. That's what he did. He was really trying to figure out, where am I going to go? How am I going to live after I'm thrown out? Well, now let's change a little bit. Where are you going to go? And where are you going to stay when the Lord comes? You see, there is a future judgment coming. There is a day coming. And that's what this parable is teaching. There's a day of reckoning. There's a time of accounting. And where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Well, it's ultimately where you've made preparation to go. And so he's commended for making preparations to be able to go somewhere. That's what he's commended for, not his dishonesty, but for his preparation. And so it reminds us that we really need to make preparation for the future, that we need to understand that we're all going to stand before the Lord on the day of judgment, that we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10. And being such that we will all stand before the Lord on the day of judgment. We need. But it also tells us to take, if you will, the story maybe just a little bit step further with regards to making preparations for the future. It tells us really to use money. A sweet prayer. Today, I believe it was today, and the individual that prayed the prayer, I so appreciate him. But I heard this in his prayer. Help us to be the kind of people that use our money, use what we have to help others. I won't tell you who said it, but I heard it. And I know the Lord heard it. And it means so much because isn't that what we're supposed to do? Pure religion, James 1, verse 27. Pure religion, undefiled before God the Father is this. Visit. Orao has the idea of to care for, to visit the fatherless and their afflictions, take care of the orphans and the widows, and to keep oneself spotted from the world. But James taught in James 1:27. Help those that have a need. And then I further emphasize that in James 2 when he's talking about faith. Now, his subject in James 2 the thought begins in verse 11, but in verse 15 and 16, the part that I want to take out for just a second, he's talking about faith and how faith is to be that which you act upon. But he uses the imagery. He says, which of you that knows your brother has need? And to paraphrase, when he comes to you, you go to him and you say, be warmed and filled, and notwithstanding, you don't do anything for him. Now, admittedly, the text there, the context, James is talking about faith. Faith acts, but he uses the imagery of helping people. And so it's sort of in the back door, if you will. James is saying once again what he said in James 1:27, help folks in need. And so whatever you do, we're reminded in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. But whatever you do, do to the glory of God. Well, that would include the way you use your money. Do it to the glory of God. Make preparations for the future. Seek first the kingdom of God. And that includes how you use your money. So Jesus is teaching. Make preparations. Be careful how you use what you got. But then a third lesson is to make use of the opportunities that lie before you. Make use of the opportunities that lie before you. Our life is like a vapor that appears for a short time and then vanishes away, staying in the book of James. James chapter 4. And with our life that's like a vapor that appears for a short time, we just have a certain amount of time in which we can use the opportunities that we have. I think I've shared with you as well. I have a little card I made a long time ago. It's just a little business-sized card, and it sits on my desk, and I see it quite often, and it has one word: opportunity. That's a personal, really, note for me to remind me of every opportunity to take advantage of. Take advantage of every opportunity to invite somebody to church, to talk to someone about the truth, to just be kind to others. Just take every opportunity that you can. Story is told of some men that were traveling, if you will, through the wilderness almost, but it wasn't vegetated wilderness. It was dry, arid wilderness. As they were one night in pitch dark, moonless night, a voice came to them and said, reach down. And they were on a riverbed. Reach down and take all the rock that you can. Put it in your pockets, put it in your bags, but know this, that tomorrow you'll be both glad and sad. And that's all the voice said. And so the guys here in the moonless night, the dark of night, struck their lanterns, took all the rock. It was just old river rock, if you will. They stuffed it in their pockets. They stuffed it in their saddlebags. And they thought, we have no idea what this is. But they went on, and in the morning, they began to check their saddlebags, and they began to check their pockets. And what they had were treasures worth untold numbers of dollars. And they realized what the voice was saying to them, that in the morning you'll be both glad and sad. Glad that you got it, sad that you didn't get more. How true it is with money. How much money is too much? More than I got. And that doesn't matter who you are. That's more than I got. But Jesus says, use your money wisely. And so we're reminded in this great parable, make preparations, use what you have, use it wisely. I hope that's been a help. I hope that gave you some understanding of what's going on there, at least what I think is going on there. But it's a great lesson, and it reminds us of the idea that the Lord's coming again. This evening, if you're not ready, if you are ready, then wonderful. If you're not ready, but you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, won't you come? All together we stand and sing.